So lately we've been mainly going over what the Bible says about evangelism, but sometimes God will just kind of interject, and there's another thing, something else that God might want us to hear. And so I feel like there's something that the Lord wants us to hear this morning, because there are times in prayer that can bring a lot of confusion to us. Things that God does or doesn't do that we don't understand, or maybe even it goes against what we thought about God, and we get upset, maybe angry. We just don't understand. And so I feel like there's a very important clarification we need to make in regards to our relationship with God when it comes to prayer. There's so many stories in the Gospels about Jesus kind of just taking care of people immediately, right? Answering prayer immediately. There's the story of the centurion who came right up to Jesus and told him that one of his servants was sick, and Jesus says, okay, I'll come to your house and I'll take care of it. But the centurion recognizes that Jesus has this authority over sickness. And he says, Lord, I understand authority. If I tell one of my servants to do something, he does it. So all you have to do is tell sickness to leave, and it leaves. And Jesus is amazed at his faith and says, you're right. And his servant's healed, immediately. Then we have the story of Jairus' daughter who was sick and actually died. And Jesus immediately went to the home and raised her back from the dead. Then we have the woman who, with the issue of bleeding, who just touches Jesus' robe, and she's healed immediately. She doesn't even talk to him. She just touches his robe, and boom, immediately healed, right? So we have these stories of Jesus. There's many more. The lepers coming up to him, just where Jesus just acts immediately. People need him. He does something. Boom. It's all taken care of immediately. Then we have this story in John chapter 11, very well-known story of a man named Lazarus. And that's kind of where we're going to park this morning. So as we begin John chapter 11, verse 1, it says, now there was a certain man who was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. So Mary and Martha, like the other people that we just mentioned, the centurion, Jairus and his daughter, and these people, they send word to Jesus, wanting him to come and heal Lazarus. And instead of experiencing some amazing miracle like Jairus did for his daughter, their worst nightmare comes true. They basically go to the Lord and send word to him, ask him to come and heal Lazarus, but Jesus doesn't even move. He just stays put. And I think we've all been there. I think we've all experienced maybe that anxiety or fear when you need God to do something miraculous, and you want to ask him, but in the back of your mind, you're thinking, what if he doesn't do anything, right? There's that voice. What if he doesn't answer me? What if he doesn't heal? What if he doesn't provide? What if he doesn't prevent death? I think that's one of the most common fears that Christians face. And because of that, when that fear creeps up, we begin praying in such a way to give God an escape clause, right? We pray in such a way where we expect God to not answer us. That way, we're not disappointed, right? Because if you get your hopes up that God's going to do something amazing and he doesn't do it, oh my gosh, it crushes you. So if you pray expecting him not to answer, then you're not disappointed. And you don't have to be upset or sad or anything like that. But when we do that, we're no longer praying with faith. Our prayers are now just ceremony. They're not really anything effective. And so I've been there where you pray, you say, Lord, please do this if, right? You put the if in there, or Lord, Lord, if this is not your will, I understand if you're not even going to do it. And so we almost we're expecting God to not even answer us before we get done praying. But because we don't want to get our hopes up, But what if the silence from God in prayer? What if the delay from God? What if him not moving is actually a better answer to our prayers than what we were even asking for in the first place? So as we come back to John 11, Jesus has a huge purpose in how he's handling this whole situation. And it's a massive lesson for us about prayer. And I think it will clear up a lot of confusion. But what's interesting is that Jesus lets it slip at the very beginning what he's going to do. So we read the first couple verses about Lazarus of Bethany and Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet. And verse 3, so the sisters sent to him saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. We'll come back to that verse. I don't want to spoil the whole point of the sermon quite yet. So verse 5, it says, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. This is a very personal thing for Jesus here. He was very, very close with Lazarus. Now it says here that he loved all of them. He loved all of them, which makes the next verse very interesting, okay? And the best way to start the verse 6 is to either have the word then or therefore, because it's directly connected to verse 5. So verse 5, it says he loved them. And so verse 6 is saying, because he loves them, therefore, he stayed 2 days longer in the place that he was. So understand this. Because he loved them, he didn't move. Because he loved them, he didn't heal Lazarus. Now that might seem mind-blowing, but that's what it says. So Lazarus is very sick, and Jesus stays put, and that's the opposite of what he needs to do. He needs to get up, he needs to go, he needs to heal Lazarus. Time is of the essence here. And he's just sitting there. He doesn't even move. But because of his love, it's precisely why he's not moving. Because sometimes loving someone can actually be much harder than you have ever imagined. Sometimes the loving thing to do is the hardest thing to do in somebody. And sometimes when you pray and you're seeking the Lord and he doesn't seem like he's answering, it doesn't seem like he's moving, it's because he loves you that he's not moving right away. So John 11, verse 7, it says, then after this he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in a day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. So Jesus is just describing like how people live, right? If they walk in the daytime, they have the light of the sun. But if they walk in the dark, you most likely trip over things. But I think there's also a spiritual analogy here, which is pretty obvious, right? If we walk in the light of the world, Jesus will be okay. If we walk in the darkness of sin, we definitely won't be okay. But then Jesus basically says it's time to go, all right? And he gives the reason why he's going to go now in verse 11. After saying these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he's sleeping, he's going to recover, right? You see, they didn't get it. A lot of people call them the disciples because a lot of times they just didn't connect the dots here. Now, Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought he meant taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus had to tell them plainly, guys, no, he's dead, okay? He's dead. He's not sleeping. Then Jesus says something really weird again, right? Verse 15. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there. Okay, this doesn't sound like Jesus. He's saying, I'm glad I wasn't there when Lazarus was sick to heal him. That doesn't sound like Jesus. He says this so that you may believe. But now let us go to him. So first it says that Jesus purposefully does not go to heal Lazarus because he loves Mary and Martha. And then he says he's glad he wasn't there for the disciples' sake. This does not seem like a very loving thing to do, right? It doesn't seem like Jesus is acting very loving. And that's, if there's one thing our culture gets wrong most of the time, it's what love really looks like. Sometimes love means doing what is going to upset somebody. So then verse 16, so Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, okay, let us go that we may die too. It just, he's like, oh, Lazarus is dead, and Jesus likes that. Okay, well, let's go die as well. Let's all go die, right? Because that's what we need to do, right? Still, he just doesn't get it. Verse 17. Now, when Jesus came, when he arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. So Jesus was very close by. He was very close by. I think there was a couple different Bethanys, and some people have said, well, Jesus was at the one that was far away. So he did leave right away. It just took him 4 days to get there. No, Jesus was not that far away. He waited purposely 4 whole days so that Lazarus would be well dead in the tomb. Why 4 days? Well, back in this time, the Jews had this strange belief that a person's spirit hovered around their body for 3 days afterwards, which would make it easier for them to come back to life. But after 4 days, their spirit has departed, and now all hope is lost. So Jesus purposely waited until all hope was lost. So the people had this hope that they kind of created in their own mind, and Jesus wanted to remove every bit of hope that was not him. He wanted everything to be removed, every bit of hope. And sometimes that's what God does to us. We are hoping in things a lot that are not really from God. And sometimes God needs to get rid of that hope. He needs to strip us of everything that is not him, so we understand that real hope is only in him. It's only in Jesus. And he did this to them out of love. Remember, he's doing this out of love. Everything he's doing is out of love. So verse 19, many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. So Martha comes out with probably the same thing we would all be thinking. Lord, you're late. If you had been here, Lazarus would not have died. So we need to understand the thinking of Mary and Martha. So she thinks something bad has happened. A failure has occurred, right? Jesus didn't make it in time, and that wasn't supposed to happen. Lazarus is dead, that's it, right? So she thinks the goal was for him to be healed. In her mind, that was the only outcome. There was no other outcome acceptable but for Jesus to come and heal Lazarus before he died. Her request to Jesus, her prayer to him, came with a closed-off mind to anything else that could possibly happen other than what she thinks should happen. How often do we have this mindset when we go to the Lord in prayer? Lord, please do this thing, because I know that there is no better outcome than for you to do what I think you should do. How often do we go to God thinking we know the only option and God must do what we think or else? And what's worse, can you imagine, and you know this probably happened, somebody come up to Martha, right, and be like, Martha, I heard that Jairus' daughter was dead and Jesus came right away. I wonder why he wouldn't come to Lazarus right away. So now you start comparing situations. And you can imagine somebody saying that to her, and she's like, you're right. He came to Jairus' daughter right away, but he waited. And so, and you see somebody else prayed for something, and God answered them, but God didn't answer it for you. And so now you start to wonder, oh my gosh, I must be bad or something. I'm not a good Christian. Something's wrong with me. Or, God, how dare you? How dare you do what they said, but you wouldn't do it for me? And so either you start becoming self-deprecating and thinking, you're horrible, you're not a good Christian, you did something wrong, or you start to think something's wrong with God. God doesn't know what he's doing. God doesn't, and we get into those misunderstandings, and boy, that probably happened last weekend, right? The tornadoes hit, people just all of a sudden thinking, well, God, something's wrong with God. God is not a good God. If that happened, there's something wrong with him, right? And so we, to be honest, we come to God with this arrogance, thinking we know everything he knows. So if God doesn't do what we think he should do, that means that he's messed up. Because we need to understand that there's so much we don't know. There's so much about God. I don't know about you. I don't want to know everything God knows. I wouldn't be able to handle it. But we have to remind ourselves there's so much information we do not have. And so before we start to think that there's something wrong with God or something, we need to realize maybe there's something I'm missing. Maybe there's information I do not have. And then when Martha says to Jesus that she knows God will give him anything he asks, Jesus basically says, we may be tempted to think she has on her mind Lazarus being raised from the dead. However, when Jesus says Lazarus will live again, Martha thinks he's talking about the future. Martha's like, oh yeah, I know, yeah, resurrection in the future, yeah. She doesn't understand what Jesus is doing there, what he's about to do. And I want to skip verses 25 through 27 and come back to it. So I want to jump to verse 28 here. And when she said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher is here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Same thing as Martha, same exact mindset. Jesus, there was a failure here. What happened should not have happened, right? And verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. Now, as I was studying this verse, I was surprised to find out that a lot of translations of this verse do not accurately depict the emotions that Jesus has. Jesus, he sees Mary weeping, and then he sees all these other Jews weeping, and it says he was deeply moved, which is kind of vague, and it doesn't really adequately express what John is saying here. So back in this time, it was customary in this day to, when somebody died, to hire professional mourners. I mean, I don't know if anybody does that today, but you open the Yellow Pages and find some company that sent professional criers. That's what would happen. It was very normal for that to happen. And so Jesus is surrounded by all these people that are mourning, and most of them are pretending to mourn. They're doing what they're being paid to do. And what exactly are Jesus' true emotions here? Well, most of the translations say he was deeply moved. I think the King James says he groaned in his spirit. But what does that even mean? How is he really feeling here? The word John uses does not mean deeply moved. The word, and I was surprised because I kept looking this up, the word means outraged. Jesus was furious in this moment. And he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. He's surrounded by all these people weeping, and it says he was furious. Why? I think it's because there's all these people that are just humoring Mary and Martha because they've been hired to do it. And here comes Jesus in their midst, and nobody can see that all their hope is right in front of them. Here's the God-man, God in the flesh right there. And they're just continuing to cry and mourn just like Mary and Martha. None of these people are telling Mary and Martha what they need to hear. Nobody is pointing them to the one they need to go to. They're just empathizing with them to their detriment. And that's where we need to be very careful. Empathy is an important thing, but it can also be used in a wrong way. The Bible says mourn with those who mourn. Of course, if somebody's hurting, we need to come alongside them. And it's important to be able to feel the pain somebody else is feeling. But if the way somebody's feeling is anti-biblical, if the way somebody feels is drawing them away from God, it's actually going to make it worse to join them in their unbiblical emotions. Because what they need is truth in love. And so I think Jesus is angry because there's all these people mourning, but nobody sees the answer right in front of them. And then verse 35, we have the shortest verse in the Bible. It just says, Jesus wept. That's an easy one to memorize. And in verse 36, the Jews see him weeping, and they assume he's weeping because because Lazarus is dead. And I think that very likely has nothing to do with it, because Jesus knows he's about to raise Lazarus from the dead. So why would he be crying over Lazarus? I think Jesus is weeping because he sees the pain of Mary and Martha, because he loved them and he sees how hurt they are. And I think he's weeping with them because he sees the pain that they're feeling. And I think he also noticed that nobody recognized the hope that was right in front of them. And I think it breaks God's heart when we don't recognize exactly who he is and what he wants to do for us. And I think Jesus' anger over the people not recognizing him probably just turned into tears. In verse 37, but some of them said, and oh man, some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? It just makes me think of today when you have people who don't know anything about God, don't know anything about the Bible, come up to you and they tell you what you should be expecting from God, right? And once, you want God to do something, or God doesn't act in a situation, and they come up to you and they say, I thought your God was powerful. I thought your God could fix things. And look, nothing's happening. And it's like they have no idea what they're talking about. They don't know God. They don't know his heart. They don't know his plans. They don't know his purposes. But that can mess with us, right? God doesn't do what we all think he should do, and we immediately start to judge God and start to doubt God. But that stems from us thinking we know just as much, if not more, than God. Like, we know what God should do. We know how God should feel in a situation. And once again, it's the assumption, right? Why wouldn't God have healed Lazarus? There's no reason why he would have let Lazarus die, right? There's no reason why he should have let that happen. And it's so easy to get in that place where we think we know what God should do. And then verse 38, then Jesus, deeply moved again, or angry again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. What's interesting here is that they knew the power of Jesus. So because they knew his power, they assumed he would have used it in this or that way. But they didn't know him. They didn't know his heart. They didn't know his character. They didn't have intimacy with him. So they knew he was powerful, but they have no clue when and why he uses his power, because they didn't know him. We know God has power. We know he's capable of anything. But if we don't know him, we won't have any idea when or why he should use any of his power for anything. We need to know him. That's what we need to know, is him. Because only when we start to know him, his heart, his mind, how he reveals himself to us, then we're going to know when and why he uses his power. And I said earlier we would come back to verses 25 through 27 of the story, because Jesus tells Martha the entire point of everything he's doing in those two verses. At the very beginning of this chapter, when Jesus, we first got word of Lazarus, he said that this illness would not lead to death, but instead it is for the glory of God, that the Son may be glorified through it. But how is he going to be glorified through this? When Mary and Martha sent word to Jesus to heal their brother, their request to ask Jesus to do something was only able to go as far as their knowledge of Jesus. Their knowledge was limited, so their requests to him were limited. They had seen him heal people. They saw him give sight to the blind, and they knew he healed the lepers. And so when their brother became sick, they knew Jesus the healer. That's all they knew, was Jesus the healer. But what Jesus knew, it was time for Mary and Martha to be brought into a deeper understanding of who Jesus is. Jesus is not just the healer, but that's all they knew. And Jesus said, it's time for them to understand I'm more than just Jesus the healer. But in order for him to reveal himself more to them, situations had to start changing for them to be able to understand. Lazarus, so Jesus said, you know me as the healer. I want you to know me better. But in order for that to happen, Lazarus needs to die. So that way, when Jesus finally came to them, They thought they were getting Jesus the healer. But, verses 25 through 27, Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? So they only knew Jesus the healer, but Jesus wanted them to know Jesus, the one that could resurrect people from the dead. He wanted to deepen their intimacy, deepen their understanding. And so what they thought was a failure was actually Jesus bringing them into a deeper understanding of who he is and what he does. But the only way that could happen is Lazarus died. But it's not enough for Jesus just to tell them. They need to see it. So verse 39, Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days. They have no concept of Jesus, the resurrector. They don't know Jesus as the one who could raise the dead. So even now they're like, Lord, why are you doing that? There's no point. It's going to smell bad. He's been dead for 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. When he said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips and his face unwrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Mary and Martha, I think, weren't able to pray for their brother to be resurrected because they didn't know that Jesus could do that. Your prayers will never go beyond your intimacy with God. If you don't know who God is, how can you pray for him to do what you don't even know about him? If you don't know him, there's only a limit to what you're going to be praying. Your prayer life will never go beyond your knowledge of God. So when you come to those times where you pray, right, and God is silent or he does nothing, it's not because he doesn't care. It's because he's about to reveal himself to you in a new way that you've never seen before, okay? But in order for him to do that, he might need to let some things die. There are things in your life that might need to die in order for you to get closer to the Lord. He may need to let the situation get worse in order to show you that he can do way more than you ever prayed for him to do. You might pray for him to do something because you aren't aware that he can do more. But he says, I want you to know I can do more, and I'm going to show you. But this is going to have to die, and it's going to be painful. One of my favorite books is called The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis. If you haven't read it, I love it. It's fascinating where, I know I'm probably messing up the synopsis, but basically a man gets on a bus where they go to heaven, but they're still alive, they're still human, so they go to heaven, and so they can't really live there. Like their footsteps do not bend the blades of grass. The blades of grass will actually pierce their feet because they're not ready to be in heaven yet. You know, they don't have those new bodies, they're not there. And so it's this amazing story. And there's this one guy who he has this little creature on his shoulder, this ugly creature. And he says, "Oh, that's lust. I can't get rid of it. It's just there." And an angel says to him, "I can get rid of that for you. I can help you." And he says, "Okay." And so the angel touches him, and this big creature starts to just get bigger, and the claws go into him, and he's like, "What are you doing? You're gonna kill me." And he's like, "Oh, no, this isn't gonna kill you, but I didn't say it wouldn't hurt." And that thing turns into this beautiful dragon that he then gets on and just rides away. And so that thing that was so painful was what God used to set him free. So sometimes the pain that God allows in your life is going to be the mechanism that is going to bring you to a deeper place with him. God has purpose for pain that he allows in our life, but we need to believe that God has purpose for that. The reason why people turn their back on God and ultimately the faith is because when God tries to bring people deeper, when he tries to do this, sometimes people they're not spiritually mature enough to handle what God is doing. They're not spiritually mature enough to see what God is doing. And so they interpret it instead of interpreting it as, oh, maybe God's doing something new, they just interpret it as God's doing something bad. God's doing something wrong. He's not who he says he is. He's not loving. He's not kind. And so they use what God is doing to cause them to actually turn as a reason to turn away from him. So if you get confused about things happening in your life, if you find yourself just totally not understanding what God is doing or why he's doing it, it's probably because you don't know him well enough. And he's doing something to try to get you to know him better, to try to bring you into deeper intimacy with him. But the question is, are you spiritually mature enough to realize that what's happening is God loving you and trying to bring you deeper? Can you realize that and wait for the fresh understanding from the Spirit of God? And once again, this is why questions are good. When we don't understand something, when something doesn't make sense, we need to ask questions. We need to try to figure things out. Because if we take things that are confusing or we don't understand, we just push them deep down, they're gonna explode in a very dangerous way. And so, as we close this morning, God, number one, he wants us to realize that with what's happening, and we all have different things happening in our lives. But when God does not do what we think he should do, when he doesn't answer the way we think he should, most of the time it's happening because he's wanting to bring you into deeper intimacy with him. He wants you to know him more than you ever did before. And the question is, are you going to trust what God is doing? Are you going to trust how he's answering? Are you going to trust how he's not answering? Are you going to continue to believe that God is too loving to be unkind? He's too wise to ever make a mistake? And that decision, whether or not we trust him, that's going to make or break everything.